Oh my God, it's thunderating out there. So, I've been meaning to do a video for 4 or 5 years now, tracing my journey to learning to play the violin. Still ongoing, of course. The story is, I decided that when I turned 60, I said, you know what, I'm going to start playing that damn thing again. And the story is that when I was 19 years old, I fell in love with bluegrass music, and of course I liked all the instruments. Dobro probably one of my favorites, but fiddle being my next favorite. So I was playing just a little bit of mandolin because some guy that was in my high school band, Rusty Martin, if you're there. Hey Rusty. His father had a mandolin. My brother got the mandolin from his father, so I played the mandolin. I learned to play the mandolin a little bit, and I said, well, you know, the mandolin's tuned the same as the violin, so why not take up violin, because it's a pretty cool instrument. I loved all the Flatt and Scruggs fiddle breaks and their songs, so I decided to take it up at 19 years old. And I learned, you know, from what little bit I could, basically on my own. Learned and moved to New Orleans, played fiddle in New Orleans, played a little bit in a band, a couple bands, my brother's band, thank you Kurt. And, you know, I was decent, but of course in retrospect I didn't know diddly about what I was doing. I only knew a couple of keys. I really didn't know a lot about it, but you know, I was naive and dumb enough to play in front of people. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So I played from 19 or probably 20 till about 25. When I was 25, I really stopped playing when I was about 23. 24, 25, I had a fiddle. I played around with it. Then my house was burglarized and they stole my violin, which was a pretty nice one as I recall, along with a couple guitars, a Les Paul, and a nice mahogany guild and a bunch of other stuff. And so then I just never bought another violin. Stopped playing, worked, didn't really think too much about it. Then later got into playing guitar. And got into that more and more, and singing, playing guitar and singing. You can see some of my other YouTube videos. But I kept thinking one day I'd start playing the violin again. So I went out and I bought this cheapo violin. You know, no sense paying too much money for it, right? I'd venture to say I paid like $100, $125 for it, you know, including the case and the bow, so you can imagine a pretty cheap violin. So every now and then I'd start to play the thing and it really sounded awful. I'm here to tell you, if you don't play for 20 or 30 years in a row, yeah, it's gone, baby. You don't pick it up and play again. You pick it up and you play like anybody else that would pick up a violin. Your fingers are all over the place, you're screeching and scratching and squawking, and it is quite a mess. And so every time I picked it up I said, oh God, no, I can't do this. So anyway, then I just set the thing aside. And, you know, years go by. I actually had this thing in my closet when I lived on the boulevard, and the air conditioning wasn't hitting on much, so it got hot in there. And then one day I said, I'm going to pull that violin out and look at it. And the glue that holds the neck onto the body apparently just sort of melted and the neck was gone. I mean, it was just loose. The strings were loose. The bow hairs had been eaten by bugs. Who knew these things? Who knew it was so complicated? And so then I said, okay, well, forget that. So then a year or so after that, I was getting closer to 60, I think. And I decided, you know, I'm going to take this back up again. I need to find somebody to make a repair on the violin. So I looked on the internet and found some expert guy from Russia that repairs violins. His brother's well known in Boston or some such place. And so I said, well, that guy could repair a violin. Come to find out, he lived 2 blocks from my house. So I went over there. He rebowed the hair, rehaired the bow, and then he glued the neck back on. And he gave it back to me, and he told me, yes, it's a cheap violin. Okay, so then I started playing a little bit, you know, trying to remember some of the tunes that I used to play, and then remembering how hard it was to play the dang thing, because first there's no frets, so where do you put your fingers, you know? And then, of course, because I had played when I was younger, I knew that there were some sort of patterns, you know, that you could play. And so I got back into the pattern thing, and at least I had an idea where these notes were. And also, having played the mandolin, which has frets, you have a little bit better concept of where the notes are in the scale. But nevertheless, I played, I did get a little bit better, but the violin was just squeaky and awful. And of course, I tried different strings because, you know, it had to be the strings, couldn't be me. And then one day I got up and the neck had come loose again. So I said, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to pay somebody to fix this cheap-ass violin. So I look in the neck and there's a big gaping hole in there. And I thought, well, the violin can't possibly be made with a big gaping hole in there. So I said, well, I'll just fix it myself. So I got some Bondo, and I smushed Bondo in the cavity in there, and then I smushed the neck back in there, and and I think I also put some glue on the edge, and then I just let that dry. So at least it was a solid connection between the neck and the body, you know. So I figured that couldn't be too bad. Of course, I didn't really get the angle of the fingerboard quite right, but hey, you know, what do you want? So then I strung it up after a few days of drying, and lo and behold, the thing had a really mellow sound to it. I said, that's the sound I was looking for, not squeaky and loud and obnoxious, but more mellow. So I said, well, that's kind of cool. So I decided to keep learning, you know, and I kept practicing, and just like everybody else, you know, the hard thing, I guess, one of the hardest things is getting the note right, or the intonation, hitting the right note. I mean, you know, there's basically an infinite number of places you can stick your finger. Only one where it sounds good, but, you know, so you're working, you're trying to get that. Seems simple enough. And then you have to do that without hitting the other notes, without hitting the other strings, because if you inadvertently hit another string, it screeches. And then, then you've got to work on getting your fingers placed correctly here. Then you have to work on getting the bow placed correctly, because you want to hit just one string, not two. Or at least, if you hit two, you want it to be intentional. Of course, fiddle tunes, you hit a lot of 2-string things. So, you know, it's intentional. And of course, I love double stop stuff. Anyway, it still sounded like a cheap-ass violin, but at least it was quieter. And also, while I'm holding this thing up, when I played when I was 19 years old, I didn't use this shoulder rest. I don't know how the hell I played the thing. And so when I restarted, of course, I didn't use this thing. I didn't have it. Never used it. Always was curious about it. And so then if you don't have it, the violin kind of falls down here. And when it falls down here, you have to kind of hold it with your hand. So you're holding it with your hand, and then you're playing notes. So you have this kind of bad position of your hand. Instead of like this, you're up here like this, kind of holding the violin. And I mean, that's the way I used to play the thing. And so it was, shall we say, very limiting. So at my local violin shop, actually I bought, I think, 2 new violins and didn't get the shoulder rests. Went to the violin shop for my 3rd one and said, what's the deal with these shoulder rests? And they said, oh, you don't use one? I said, no. And they said, well, you should. So I said, okay, you know, give me one. I said, how do you put it on there? And the lady says, you cradle the violin like a baby. And I said, lady, I don't know nothing about babies. Don't want to know anything about babies. But no, I didn't really say that. I said, okay, all right, that's fine. So then I just figured my own way. I just hold the thing like this. You want this to be the shorter part, because unless you got a really long neck, you want the shorter part to be under there, so that you can get your neck on there, and then the longer part is going to be resting not really even on your shoulder, more like your collarbone. Then you can hold the violin pretty steadily out to the side. You know, you don't really think too much about it, other than then you got to figure out how you get the shoulder rest to be in the right position. So I asked them, you know, what was the right way to do it, and they said, whatever is the most comfortable for you. So I said, okay. That was 3 years ago, and I still haven't really figured out which is most comfortable. I had it way down here, and it seemed to be something was wrong with the way the violin was being held, and it was hurting my neck, and so then I moved it over this way, which allowed the thing the violin to come up this way under my neck, as opposed to being way up here, and then it made it a lot easier to hold. So my deal is it's over that way is pretty good, actually. I don't know how people teach this. I still haven't really found anybody who gave me an explanation other than, oh, just try it and see what you like. Not to mention, oh my God, you know, there's 20 different kinds of shoulder rests. Some people just use a sponge with a rubber band around there. I don't know. I like these. I haven't tried too many of them. I've tried a few, but this is the Kuhn. They make several different kinds actually, and all three of my violins have got these on them. I cannot play without a shoulder rest. It's totally absurd. People do it, you know, some people hold their fiddle down here, do whatever they want to do, but I prefer to hold it at least somewhat like a real violin player. Anyway, so what I've done, I got a new violin, and that's a long story. I came into some money, and so I spent $1,200 for a violin and a case and a bow. Come to find out, I won't say it was a complete rip, but the violin was not set up anywhere near correctly. It was horrible. I don't know what I was thinking. I was really blind. I get into that later. But anyway, I bought a new violin. Ended up getting it working right. And so then I really didn't like this one because the mellow tone with a bondo in there actually became, once I started playing notes clearer and hitting the strings better and not screeching and scratching, then I didn't really like that mellow sound. I wanted the thing to ring out a little bit more. So I got the new violin. That worked really well. And then I was just going to retire this thing, which I did. I put it in the case and then I put it downstairs and didn't touch it for another year or so. But then I discovered this alternate tuning, which I love alternate tunings, because I learned alternate tunings back when I was 20 or 21 years old because I couldn't play the thing right, couldn't get my fingers in the right position, so I just retuned the strings so I could get the notes. Anyway, that's when I discovered alternate tuning. And so I discovered this DDAD tuning that's good for Midnight on the Water. D, D. So they're an octave apart. D, D, A, and then another D. So there's lots of D's in there. Pretty cool for that song, you know. And then the thing is, I didn't really want to have to retune my violins for D-D-A-D, especially since that one's an octave low, and when you tune it an octave low, it takes forever to settle into that, so it's forever going out of tune. So I said, you know, I'm going to pull that cheap violin out, retune it to D-D-A-D, and just have it, and that's just for Midnight on the Water. And then also Bonaparte's Retreat. I haven't really learned that one, but that also is in the same tuning. So I can play 2 songs with this one and put it back in a case. Don't worry about it. So anyway, that's the introduction to my series of videos that I'm going to do about my adventures in learning to play the violin or trying to be a violin player. It's pretty interesting, really, because there's so many different levels of the violin. There's getting your finger to hit the right note. There's getting the bow to hit the right string. There's getting the bow to make the right noise on the string and moving it smoothly and long enough to make a good note and loud enough, quiet enough. Then, of course, then you got this whole vibrato thing, which I'll probably be working on for my whole life. Not the same as a guitar, which is sort of up and down, and this is more back and forth kind of deal. You have learning the notes. Then, of course, you have learning the tempo. And then you have to put it all together. Then, of course, there's the violin itself. Obviously, the violin with bondo on it isn't really the best thing. But there are a lot of levels is what I'm getting at. So what I'm going to do is a series of videos about my experiences learning to play the violin. And hopefully it'll be interesting. So there you go. This is video number 1, and we'll see where it goes.